In today's project, I'm going to make a small box in the style of a Japanese iron box. I'm not sure how they're constructed. They look seamless, but I'm pretty sure that they're constructed in parts. But that gave me an idea. Could I make a steel box in one piece without any cuts or welds? One option would be hammer forming, which I have done before, but that will only work with thinner sheet material, and I want to use thicker steel, so that will also need heating up as well. I did do a quick test by hand that sort of worked, but nowhere near good enough. I started with 3mm steel and it got pretty thin. So I've got another idea. I'll try using the fly press with a homemade jig. I'll start with making the tooling. It's not going to be quite as straightforward as it may appear. There's a bit to think about, but hopefully we can force a box shape out of one piece of steel. This isn't the sensible way to make a box. Fabricating it would be far easier, but I want to see if it's possible. And if it is, I'll finish the box in a second video with brass liners, a homemade hinge, and a gold inlay technique that I've been super keen to try out. That's all of the pieces ready to weld together. I'll just take a moment to explain the plan. The example here wouldn't work. It would require too much force to form the box in one go. So instead, I'll make the bottom die larger and press it in stages by adding inserts. The blank for the box also needs to be thought about. A regular rectangle piece will likely fail. There'll be too much material in the corners. I'll finish making the tooling though and get to that next. I'll get on with it and I won't show too much of making the tooling, but I thought it was worth showing enough to give you a gist of what's happening. I'm aiming to take you through the whole process, which I don't expect to be super smooth, but we'll find out. For the top die, I don't have a piece of steel big enough, so I've welded pieces together. All of the steel for these jigs is from what I already have, but I did buy the steel for the actual box. I decided that I may as well use the milling machine and get the top die accurate. Next, I'll quickly make the inserts. As I've already mentioned, there's easier ways to make a box, but I quite like having constraints on a project as it forces you to think differently. You can learn more from it rather than just doing what makes sense. It's a way of being creative, and that's when making can be more fun. That's the first insert done. I did the others off camera and I used 3mm thick steel as that's what I have at hand, and I wanted them to be less than the 12mm that I used on the first one. Next, I'll round over the edges, which will hopefully help with forming and making it a smoother process. We're almost there. I just need a bottom plate to hold down the bottom die and a shank to hold the top die in the fly press. At this point, I genuinely don't know if this is going to work or not, and that's half the reason for trying it. The not being sure about it makes it more interesting to me anyway. I'm using 6mm spacers, and the steel I'll use for the box is 5mm. This will give me a bit of wiggle room and should hopefully not get too stuck onto the dies. There's a problem though, there's not enough height on the fly press to remove or put in the inserts. The dies are much taller than they need to be though. They're 50mm where the final box will be around 30mm. I only use that steel because it's what I already had. I did think about clearance, but I thought it'd be okay. To fix it, I'll reduce the height by milling it. It's not going to be the most stable setup, especially for the thinner inserts, but I think it should work out okay. I wasn't expecting to reach a hurdle in the project just yet, and I haven't even started forging. Anyway, that went well, so now for the other half. I also took some off the top die, but in doing so I went past some of the welds, so I'll open up the joints and re-weld them. That's better, so now I can prepare a blank for the box and start forging. It's about the same size as the bottom die, which I think should be about right, and I also need to remove the corners. To form a box, any material that's moved has to go somewhere. The corners have far too much material to form easily into a crisp angle. You can see that here in this part fabricated box where the corner is cut away. That material in a formed or forged box has to go somewhere. The way I'll try is to round off the corners. I'm totally guessing how much to take off, but if this even works at all, then I can make adjustments for the next one. I should have maybe cut these off first before grinding, but a 24 grit belt eats through it, no worries. It's ready to go. I thought I'd show quite how thick it is and what I'm dealing with. This really is going to be a challenge. Anyway, let's get it into the forge. I'm really not expecting this to work out first time. I've bought enough steel to make 10 boxes if needed, but hopefully it won't come to that. I do need 2 though, one for the main box and one for the lid. I did speak to a friend about this project who's an experienced blacksmith. He had his doubts whether I'd be able to do this with 5mm thick steel, but he thought the project had merit and I should go for it, but it shows the challenge that I'm up against. Some of you may have noticed that this is a different fly press to what you would have seen in past videos. The old one was a 6-ton fly press and this new one is an 8-ton. Well, that worked well enough. It'll be the easiest step to form though, and it'll get tougher with each added insert. But it's a start and it worked. It's also pretty cool too. Maybe I should finish the video here and retitle it as Making an Odds and Ends Tray. I haven't shown it, but you can see that I've put a centre punch mark on the end of all the inserts, so I've put them in the right way. They're pretty square, but they do jam up if they go in the wrong way around. That wasn't supposed to happen. A couple of years ago I made a bunch of these shanks for new tooling. I obviously didn't do a good enough job of the welding, even though I haven't broken any before. I'll cut it off and weld the shank directly to the die and get back to forging. I'll also weld a couple of pieces to the top of the die to seat up against the bottom of the ram on the fly press. That should work better. I just need to line up the die to the bottom die and then get back to it. I can see that there's still too much material on the corners, so I'll grind a bit off and then put it back in the forge. I'm struggling, but I'm able to free the box from the die, but it's a pain and something I need to figure out for the next box. There's still one insert to go, but I'll cool it down and take a look at it. Even though I ground some off on an earlier heat, I need to grind off some more. If I leave it on, not only will it rise up too much, but it'll also make it more difficult for the box to form to the dies. Let's get it back in the forge and press the next stage with the last insert. I really need to add some sort of stripper plate. It took quite a while to release it, longer than what I've shown here. Anyway, it turned out pretty good, but more importantly, it actually worked. The edges still need a bit of straightening and the corners need crisping up. I'll make another jig to do that, but first I'll prepare another blank. I'm reducing the size, so hopefully I won't need to grind any off mid-process. I've milled slots into these scraps of steel. I'll drill and tap into the jig, and these should hopefully keep the insert seated and not lift out when releasing the forge box. The stripper plate wasn't easy to figure out, but I think I may have a solution with a handheld tool made from a few more scraps. I can't see why this wouldn't work. It will push up against the body of the fly press and hopefully strip the box from the die. Let's go for box number 2. While it's in the forge, I'll secure the first insert, then it should be just about ready to go. I've been careful to align the blanks on the first heat, but I've realised that the same care is needed on the second heat as well. This one's a bit skew with, but from the third heat onwards they line up automatically. It's already feeling like a much improved process, and the stripper tool works great as well. Because this one got skewed, the one corner needs dealing with. I've ground it down off camera, so let's get it back in the forge. Now I have a new problem. It won't come out of the bottom die. I thought about it for a minute and then realised that cooling it down would make it contract. That did the trick and was a nice easy fix. Even though that's 2 done and it's all I actually need, I feel like I haven't quite nailed the process. So I'm going to try again. This time I'll take even more off the corners and I'll attempt to do this with no mid-process grinding at all. I managed to do the whole process without any grinding, but I still need to remove more off the corners if I want the perfect blank. I've decided to give it one more go and also make the blank a bit bigger but take more off the corners. By using a template that I've made, it'll be just about an oval, which is pretty crazy to think that should turn into a box. This one's looking really good and the best one so far, but with one more heat to go, it does need the corners grinding off, so it's still not the perfect blank. I'll do a quick recap. I'll just say that they're all usable. They do need squaring up, and I'll do that next. The first one went well. I did have to grind the corners on just about every heat though, and it was a bit of a wrestle with the jig. The second one, that was with the improvements to the jig, and that definitely helped. But on the second heat, I did put it in a bit skew with, and I also had to grind the corners on this one as well. But it came out okay, and like I say, it's still usable. The next one, I didn't do any grinding. I reduced the size of the blank, and that went fairly well, but the corners still did come up too much. And right at the end, I couldn't get the stripper plate in, so I had to take the top die off and hammer the box off the die. And the last one, which came out the best, I did have to grind the corners once though, but that wasn't too bad. The fact that I'm cooling it down to release it from the jig means I can handle it, and it only takes a minute to grind the corners. I do think that I could do it without any grinding though. I'm not going to go again. I'm happy enough with how this has turned out, and I think I've learned enough. But if you look, the sides are higher than the middle, so I think if I reduce the blank in this direction, I think it would come out just about right without any grinding. I'll move on to the squaring jigs. I've already prepared the pieces ready for welding. I'll get on with it and I won't show too much and then get straight to trying them out. I really don't know how they'll work, but that continues the theme of the whole project. Just like the top die from earlier, I've had to weld pieces together to get a die big enough. The top die will press down like this, so next I need to grind the top off parallel to the workbench top. I've angled the table over to 45 degrees and also clamped the fence at 45 degrees as well. Now that I've established a decent flat, I can remove the fence and grind it just using the beveling table, which allows me to set the table closer to the belt. This is how it will work, but it's not quite going to work like I thought it would. I was going to weld a shank to the top die and fix it in the fly press, but I don't have the clearance as the sides of the box will interfere with the die. So instead I'll weld a handle to it and press down onto the top with a separate die fixed in the fly press. I'll weld the bottom die to a plate, and to give me more vertical height under the fly press, I'll sink the die into the plate. That should work, but before I put the boxes into the forge, I'll trim off the top edges just roughly for now to make them easier to work with. That worked great and it looks much neater. Also, I hadn't mentioned it before, but when they came out of the first jig, the sides weren't square, but this fixes that. It does leave more of a radius than I'd hoped for, but I always knew that the edges would need more work, but maybe not quite as much. The top die has too much surface area to push the material into the corners. I've made another jig to use on my 3-ton fly press, which has more vertical clearance. The top tool doesn't have anywhere near the same surface area, so 3-ton will be no problem at all. I've also set a stop so I don't go through the corner of the box. There's still further to go to get them crisp, but that's a much tighter radius along the edges. I maybe should have squared the next ones first, but I thought I'd jump straight to this step and see how it goes. Now I'll see if I can push the very corner out a touch more with a different top tool, and I'll use that with the bottom squaring die. To make it easier to use, I welded a handle onto it. I think my top tool needs softening as I've gone through one of the corners. I'll grind it less angular and try the next boxes. I'm also relieving the bottom die a touch right in the corner to hopefully allow the material to push into rather than the top tool going through it. I'll do the other three and then I'll put them all through the square and jigs at the end. Anyway, none of the 4 boxes have actually worked. I've got far too aggressive with those corner tools and I've actually punched through on quite a few of the corners. So I think what's happened is I've ground these far too acute and I kept grinding them more acute as I went, thinking that would help, but I think it's done the opposite thing. So for example, I think this is pushing through the material and it's actually pushing through the corner like that, where if I ground this a lot more obtuse, I think it would push the material possibly more into the corner, but at least not going through. I'll cut 2 more blanks and do the whole process again. I'm pretty confident I can do it this time and it gives me a chance at using that more squashed in blank. One other modification I need to take care of is on the top die. A couple of times I got the stripper caught between the top die and the ram, which wanted to strip the tooling away rather than the box. I'll weld a couple of scraps on to prevent that from happening again. You can see how much shorter the blank is crosswise compared to the bottom die, but it's still the same width as the die the other way. Anyway, I'll put them in the forge and get on with it. I won't show too much as I think you've already seen enough of the process by now. One of them was a bit wonky again, but there's enough height to play with and we'll be fine as a lid. You can see that the new grinders forced the material towards the corner. I won't push things any further for now though, so I'll do the very corner next, and this time I'll heat each corner separately with the induction forge. There's still a fair radius on the corners and it may not look like I've done much, but there's definitely more material right there in the corner and I haven't gone through. So next I'm going to crisp these up. I'm going to do it by hand with a hammer, and what I'm going to do is just heat up just the section I'm working on and keep the sides cold or coldish. So when I've got that down on the anvil, that will support the corner and it won't all collapse, it will keep its shape. But before I do that, I'm going to grind the top, not to final dimension, just to flatten it so it sits nicer while I'm working on it. It's not a super hot heat and it cools down quickly, but that's fine, as this step could even be done cold. It would just take longer. It's working great though. I thought it would, but I wasn't certain until I tried. I'm trying to keep to a system by grabbing the edge that I've just done and then working on the next one around. This way I can keep some consistency and track where I've done. I went around a few times, crisping up the corners more with each pass. I really enjoyed this process, which took about 10 minutes. The bottom edges are pretty well there, so next I'll work on the side edges and the corners. To refine it further, I checked around the whole box, working the edges without any heat. That one went great, but I thought I'd try the next one with the power hammer just to see how it would go. It only just fits under as it's a really tiny power hammer. It's working but difficult to see, so after getting so far I went back to the hammer and anvil. It wasn't the best idea to use the power hammer. I've ended up with two different sized boxes. They were a lot worse than this, but this bottom one I kept working in and I got it pretty close, but by doing that I ended up cracking this corner by overworking it. And the reason is, doing this one with the power hammer, I hammered down on it first, and I did that at the start of the heat when more materials getting moved, and that would have pushed it outwards. This one I started by hammering the sides first and then the bottom, and if anything that would have pushed it in. So I'll remake this one, I'll do that off camera and get back to the same stage. It took an hour or so with setting up the jigs again, but it all went very well now that I've nailed the process, and it's a much better match than this one here. They fit together pretty well. They still need a bit of squaring up and just final fitting together, but they're looking pretty good. I'll trim them down to final size now and then start to finish them up. I could have tried using a smaller blank for the lid, but as I knew the blanks that I'm using work, I thought it was easier to just take this route. Also, it uses up any that got misaligned. I will grind them again after I've done the final fitting of the lid to the box. I've cut a piece of pine to hold the two pieces together while I refine them. It's not perfect, but it isn't really supposed to be. It's pretty cool though, considering that it was just a piece of 5mm thick flat bar. This is about as simple as a box can be, but getting there, maybe not so much so. It took quite a few failures, a fair amount of tooling and experimenting, but I thought it was all worth it. Let me know what you think. Now that I know the process works, I can focus on making something worth decorating. I'm not sure I'll use this one for the actual Japanese style box. It's not bad, but I think I could do slightly better. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.